Hello, everyone. Welcome and good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we'll be covering another installation in our product management leadership series. We'll be discussing whether you should be data-driven, data-informed, or data-inspired. My name is Rina Alexin, and I am the CEO of 280 Group. I've been leading the company now for the past 4 years, bringing transformational change to product management teams everywhere. And nowadays, you really can't emphasize enough the importance of using data to drive insights and decisions. That is why we created the curriculum for digital product management that's been recently available in a go-at-your-own-pace self-study version. This course goes deep into the topic of data, which we'll be discussing today. And I'm so excited to be introducing our very own Todd Blaquiere. Todd is a principal consultant and trainer with us at 280 Group. He has deep expertise in creating product and marketing strategies for companies ranging from startup to enterprise across engineering, media, publishing, life sciences, and the nonprofit sectors. Todd attributes his greatest technology successes to his ability to connect with peers, users, and stakeholders as real partners. He also makes it his personal mission to make product work fun for everyone, which I can personally attest to, though, Todd, I'm not here for jokes. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Todd. Before we get into it, I'd like to first go over a few housekeeping items. After this webinar, continue to stay engaged with the product management community. Consider joining our LinkedIn leadership group, where you can use it as a forum to share best practices and tips with your peers. We'll be pasting a URL into the chat box shortly. At 280 Group, of course, we love interacting with you. And during this webinar, we really encourage you to ask questions. You can use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen to type in questions at any time. We will be leaving time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. And Todd, with your permission, I'll even be bringing a few of those questions while we're live. Great. Our most popular question is, can we watch this webinar later? And the answer is yes. All attendees will be receiving a link to the webinar recording after it has ended. Our agenda for today, first, I'll be covering a little bit about 280 Group, and Todd will take it from there to tell you some stories about data, define some data archetypes, and teach you not only how to leverage each of these methods, but how to also mitigate bias and use those methods effectively. So 280 Group, our mission is pretty clear. We are on a mission to empower product professionals with the knowledge and tools to build products that matter. And what makes us different is that we're focused on the needs of product professionals everywhere. So whether you need help as an individual looking to grow your career, your knowledge and skills, or you're a product leader working on improving your team's effectiveness, we have the expertise and the services that will get you to the next level. Next slide, please. Feel free to check us out at 280group.com. And of course, as I already mentioned, one of our flagship courses, the Digital Product Management course, is available both in our virtual and our self-study go-at-your-own-pace versions. We have pasted a URL to look us up in the chat. And now we're going to get into it. And so I think we get to start, as we usually do, with a poll. And so can we please launch the poll right now? Great. So if you can answer, and honestly, I almost wish this was a select all, because I'm sure in any given day, this answer for you might change. But if you can, think about your what you mostly do when you are using data in your decision making, right, Todd?
Absolutely. I love to use my intuition, and I need data. Right. Sometimes I don't have it.
Yeah, so I guess it's a little bit of an unfair statement here, but based on the poll results, and it's no surprise that most people sometimes use data when it's appropriate. There are a few that have trusted their intuition, and there's even some that say they don't know how to use data, or don't collect it at all. So that's all right. Wherever you're starting today, I think this webinar will share some great tips and best practices for you to start using data more effectively in your career.
I love it. And we're going to start off with some stories. We'll dig deep into how we're using data, as Rina said, and some different ways to make sure we're using data the right way. But I love stories. I think everybody loves a good story. And as product managers, we have to be good storytellers. So let me take you through some stories that help illustrate what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to introduce you to 3 people from my career. The first one here is data-driven Dan. Dan loves to make decisions using data. He loves data. He loves to find the thing that is objective. He wants to find, if possible, a silver bullet piece of data. He's really fascinated with artificial intelligence and machine learning because he loves the idea that you can get data, get down to a number that can make a decision, because he believes numbers don't lie. He believes that facts speak for themselves. So I worked with Dan when I was at Tribune Publishing. Tribune Publishing, if you don't know, Tribune Publishing is a group that has many publications underneath it, including the LA Times, or at the time it was the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune, New York Daily News, Orlando Sentinel, and on, many different publications. And Dan, his role was to be able to create videos and add those videos to stories across the Tribune network. So he had to know which stories were performing well, which were interesting, and to know which ones had a high view velocity, so that were trending stories that were going to become really important, so that he could create a video for them and add it to the story. So Dan was really successful. He was able to drastically increase video consumption and video ad revenue. And the way he did this was by using a dashboard. He had a dashboard that showed him what the most popular stories were and those stories that were trending upward. And so he used data. The data made the decision for him. And whatever the data said, this story, that's the video he produced, and that's the video he attached the story to.
Right. And Todd, wouldn't you say that Dan was working with a very well-defined problem, right? Yeah. So his objective was very clear. And so he can leverage data specifically because the data was telling enough of that story for him to make that decision.
Very clear objective and very clear KPIs, right? He just needs to know which article had the most views. He didn't need to know anything else outside of that to make the decision. This, by the way, is a picture of the LA Times lobby. I used to walk through that every day on my way to work. It's cool. The Globe lobby. This is Inga, data-informed Inga. She loves using data to make decisions. In fact, she can never have enough data. She likes both qualitative and quantitative data. She wants observations of users. She wants to have interviews, but she also wants dashboard metrics. She wants product KPIs. She likes all of the information. She loves learning from experience. And in fact, she believes that her superpower is that she can combine her experience with data to find the best answers. Inga's not a real person. I made up that name, actually, from looking at a baby naming site online.
Really?
Because I'm bad at naming things, but data-informed Inga, that's where I got it. Now, I worked with Inga at IQVIA. I'm going to tell you a story about Inga. IQVIA, for those who don't know, is a contract research organization. They run clinical trials for pharma companies and also produce software products for pharma companies. So she needed to create an improved user experience for one of these products. She needed to improve that, needed to create a tighter funnel and more efficient process for the end user. So Inga went to get her data. She interviewed lots of end users. She created prototypes and she tested them to see which ones worked best with the user. She ran surveys, and she also relied on her own knowledge. She had a deep knowledge and background in design heuristics, and she knew how to appropriately surface and display information for an end user. So she used both of those, and she was successful. She actually developed a new UX that delighted our end users and improved our product metrics, in specific, the frequency and the ease of getting through that funnel, that path. And this is data-inspired Imogen. She loves data when it's available. She doesn't always have data, and she knows that. I worked with her at a nonprofit called Fight the New Drug. And her satisfaction comes from challenging the status quo. She wants to do something new. She wants to do something exciting. She likes coming up with new things. And she really believes in following her intuition. She's been around for a while. She has a lot of experience. And so she trusts herself. So at Fight the New Drug, when I was there, she had to come up with a new way to promote our new product. Our product was something that was designed to inspire people to overcome challenges. So she worked with her team. She generated lots of ideas, including one for a video. She had some data on that. She knew that our audience of teenagers love videos because we had great data on it. But she was also a rock climber, an experienced rock climber. So she created this cool video of a rock climber conquering a mountain as a metaphor for our product. It was successful, created a lot of buzz for the new product, and it worked. So here's the question. What do these three people have in common? And the answer, they all found success. They all found success in what they need to accomplish. And Rina pointed out at the beginning, Data-Driven Dan had a very distinct goal in mind, and he found a solution to get there that was a dashboard that helped. Each person had an idea of what they wanted to accomplish, and they were successful. They achieved some success. But
right, I would also add, right, each of them, and you're telling a story, but it's not that they made a decision right after the first try. I think in all three cases, even if you're data inspired, you're still iterating and trying to get new information, new data points. It's, I think in Dan's case, of course, it was a lot more defined, but you define that over time as well as you get new information.
I love that. I love that. And that's a great point. And the context matters here, right? The situation matters. To your point, in Imogen's situation, she's going to generate a lot of data. She's going to need to generate a lot of different ideas along the way, right? In Inga's situation, she needs a lot of different data, and that's changing constantly. And so I thought I'd go through each, but let's start by defining some of these terms that we just used. And the first one we're going to start with is data, just really quickly. I know you guys know what data is, but just what we mean in this webinar when we say data, we're referring to both the qualitative and the quantitative. Qualitative being data that describes, usually it's gathered using observation, it's recorded in words. Some examples here: empathy interviews, shadowing, focus groups, thought leader articles. And then quantitative, this is data that's counted, it's measured, it has some numerical value to it. So again, some examples: surveys, statistics, product metrics, and financial records.
Now, Todd, I think you're going to disagree with me here, and that's okay. But when you are using qualitative data, there are different ways that you can turn it more quantitative. There is some subjectivity, and I know we're going to discuss different types of subjectivity involved. But if you are only able to access qualitative data, it's important to learn different mechanisms by coding and turning that data into more quantitative a quantitative picture of what you're trying to discover.
Well, and I'll actually agree with you. I've done this with empathy interviews too. We're going through, one of the things I like to understand a lot of times is how much time does something take? How long does this activity take typically?
Right.
And after a while, I can look at themes across them, and I do have some quantitative data. I know it takes about a week to do this particular activity. Yeah, it's a great point. So what do we mean? We call it 3 different archetypes. What are they? So here are some definitions to help you. And these definitions tell you both how data is collected or what data is collected, as well as how the decision is made. So in a data-driven way, the data tells you where to go and you follow. This is data is collected, it's used directly, but the data makes a decision. So my metaphor here, as poor as it may be, my metaphor is like a GPS when it says to turn left, right? Usually you have a set thing, you're following the GPS, and at some point during your drive, it will tell you there's a shorter path if you turn here. You agree to follow based on the data saying there's a shorter path. You're really using a data-driven method to drive at that point. Data-driven method to drive. All right, that works. Data-informed. This data-informed is the data that helps you make the decision. So you're gonna need lots of data. You're gonna spend time analyzing it, and you're going to use your experience, your knowledge, and the context around you. But ultimately, you make the decision. You're the person deciding, and it's based on a lot of different information and data points. So my metaphor here, my analogy here, it's like a GPS. It's the same metaphor. In this case, it's like deciding on a route. A lot of times when we go to decide on a route, we know where we want to go. There's lots of ways to get there. I used to, back when we went to offices, remember when we went to offices, Rina? It's crazy. It was like 800 years ago. When we went to offices.
I'm in an office right now.
Yes, we're in this beautiful office. Rina's right around the corner, right over here. When we're in an office, or when I was going to an office, I like taking the scenic route. I like collecting my thoughts on the way to work. I love driving through the trees. And so I knew, even though I'd use a GPS, I knew which one was the tree-lined drive. Or maybe I want to stop and eat somewhere, and I know where my favorite restaurant is. So I'm going to choose a route that fits me.
And also, if you are ever in New York City, cab drivers have their own route no matter what the GPS is saying.
They're not even data. That's a good transition. They're not even data informed. They're data inspired.
That's right.
They know the data. They've been there, and they know how to find the route. And this is something interesting too with data inspired. Here I say you have little data to no data. You might have to rely on proxy information, experience, and intuition. But also, you may not know where you plan to end up. You may not have that design objective like the data-driven situation. You may say, we know this is a good place to start, and we're going to see how we go. We're going to find our own path along the way.
So Todd, I want to just quickly interrupt you because we did have a question based on my comment around using and turning qualitative data to quantitative. We're not going to go into depth here, but if you reach out to us at 280 Group, I can point you to a webinar where we go over how you need to think critically about coding your qualitative data so you can draw out themes. And the coding process helps turn qualitative data into a more quantitative picture. So you could talk to frequency, for example, of a certain theme showing up. So let's move on from that question. Good question, Thomas.
So data-driven, they'll go over each of the data types now, compare them. What are the positives, what are the pros and cons of each? Data-driven, it's fast, certain, and provides scale. And what I mean by that is it's fast because you don't have to spend a lot of time in debate and discussion, right? You have maybe one or maybe two KPIs you're driving towards. Whichever flag is raised, that's the one you follow. It's more certain because there's little to no opinion involved. Data-driven Dan, it said this article was #1. Well, he's gonna make a video for that. He doesn't need to argue with anyone about it. And it scales really well. If you have a data-driven model, you can put it in the hand of anyone and they can be effective with that. Think again about that dashboard, right? We take that, we can scale it, move it across many different people. They can all use the same model, come to the same solution, same results, same decision. But there are cons and disadvantages here. And this is why it's not appropriate for a lot of product decisions. One, it's rigid. It's not as adaptable. That dashboard tells him how many video views or how many views an article has and what the velocity is. It doesn't tell him how long people are reading the article. It doesn't tell him if people like the article. Maybe lots of people are looking at it, but no one likes it. It doesn't tell him any of that. It's very rigid and it's myopic, right? You can miss things that would be advantageous to know. And this happens a lot when people try to be data-driven with product. You can see it when people optimize from one KPI. I'm going to use another video example. I'm sorry, but I worked for so long video platforms. It's a lot of my experience. So another video example, and you guys might have seen this on YouTube. Think about like 8 years ago. Remember on YouTube when almost every video had clickbaity titles and clickbaity images, and almost no image was even in the video that you watched. And that was because everyone was optimizing for views. That's all they cared about was views. And then they were leaving behind customer delight. It didn't matter if people liked the video or even stuck around. They're only focused on views. And then the last point I have here, the disadvantage, it can be biased. A lot of times we think, unlike what Dan believes numbers don't lie. Sometimes numbers don't lie, they can be misused. Sometimes data is biased. The example I have here is, I don't know if you've heard of this, in 2015, Amazon's AMZNO team, Amazon.O team, they were trying to create a way to expedite recruitment for new hires, make it really easy to find new candidates. And they created an AI for that. But the AI, the data that they used was based on a lot of technology hiring at the company, which was largely male. So the AI turned out to be anti-woman. it began to not, it would, what's the right term there? It would reject any resume that had like women's tennis in it or all women's school. Ooh, it's irritating hearing that.
Yeah, Todd, there is a great book called Invisible Women that goes over a lot of different ways in which data is can be biased against women. And that's really the key here is that if it is biased, it's not serving you, right? So I'm sure Amazon didn't intend to limit their pool to only men, but that's important to know that you still need to apply your own perspective after you see this kind of data.
Yeah, when it was identified, they killed it, right? They killed the product. Let's give them credit.
I would hope so.
Although I'm all for anything that speeds up hiring. That takes so long. Recruitment is so hard. You probably need a data-informed model though for recruiting, right? You need a data-informed model.
Yeah.
It's holistic. It has greater scope. It's more creative. And I won't go over each of these in detail, but just really briefly consider this: when you're using a data-informed model, it's holistic because you're considering all the context, and you can satisfy more than one single desired outcome. So you can optimize for your product KPIs while ensuring you're providing customer delight and making your customers happy. You get a lot of scope because you can see how these decisions connect to other decisions. We know this in the product world. There's rarely, when you're making a decision at a higher level around your roadmap, around your features and themes, you often have to consider the rest of the product portfolio and where you fit. You need a data-informed model to do that. You need to be considering lots of data. And it's more creative because it gives you opportunities. Data-driven says yes or no, it's binary. Data-informed gives you opportunities for lots of different answers. There are cons though with the data-informed. And the first one is it's complex, it's hard. It takes a lot of time. And if that's one thing you walk away from this conversation with is it's going to be hard, but that's not an excuse. So we'll get to that a little bit later. It's hard. You need lots of data. It takes a lot of effort. It's uncertain, and sometimes that uncertainty can lead to analysis paralysis because data-informed decisions aren't fact. You can't say that 100% this is the answer. You're using still your own intuition and your own experience, and so that can lead to lots of churn trying to decide where the data is.
Oh, I love a comment from Mira that yes, it does require using our brains, but I will also say that if you want to stand out in your career as a leader and as a strategic thinker, you have to have a point of view. And it is hard to say it because when you're making a data-informed decision, as Todd is saying, there is a level of uncertainty that means you can fail. What you need to make sure you're doing is having a very, I guess, logical way of coming to that conclusion, backing up your reasoning with data, and then having real outcomes, right? Having a KPI or a sense of where you want to go that you know whether or not you're failing fast enough. A good company will never, ever punish you for making a wrong decision, but analysis paralysis does not move your company forward.
I love that. And it's good to hear because I'm in the middle of writing an email to you, Rina, and I'm providing some data why we should make certain decisions. It's a bias as well. It's bias as well. I mean, ultimately, we have our own personal background, our own self-interest, and that can lead to using data to confirm our opinions. And we'll get into that in a minute as well. The last one, data inspired. There are pros here. And I think what's funny is a lot of people who are used to using data go, really, this is scary. Well, there are some pros. The pros to you being in a data inspired situation is that you can be a little more innovative. The possibilities are endless. You're discovering lots of different ideas. You should be collaborative in this situation because there's not a rigorous framework. So you have to rely on a lot of feedback from others, and it's freeing. It's a lot faster in some cases because you're not impeded by processes or by bureaucracy. There's not like you don't become a template zombie where you have this one way of doing things. It's very freeing. But the cons here is it can be directionless. And, you know, Rina spoke to having those KPIs to make sure you're on the right path and measuring that. Sometimes with data inspired way, you don't know what the right data is yet. And so and you don't know necessarily where your endpoint is. So it's hard to ensure you're going the right direction. You think about Imogen, she was making that video there's no way to know that that video is the right thing until it's out there. There's no step along that path to really check that. And that's scary. And also it's fuzzy. You talked about communicating rationale into being a product leader. That's really challenging when you're data inspired because you have less data, you have less of a rationale to live on and drive that consensus and buy-in. And there's an open door there for politicking. Finally, guess what? It's biased too. This is almost wholly reliant on your past experience. So bias is almost surely to creep in. This is where you might hear some of those, we always done it this way kind of thing. This is the way I've always done it, which is definitely biased. I had a question for you, Rina, because you're CEO of 280 Group. Would you ever want us to use do you see a place for data inspired decision making at 280?
We can't be innovative without it. So there, and I want to also say, Jake said, and we'll answer this question live, Jake, that data is not inherently biased. It's it's the application of it that can show bias. With respect to data inspired, it's like anything else. Data is a resource and you're using it as a tool to answer a question. There are going to be questions that require you to not have as much data, right? If you want to be truly innovative, the example is like Ford, right? If you ask people what they want a faster horse. He had to be data inspired, trust his intuition to make a huge innovative step. But again, the key here is linking that with results. So obviously Ford was very, very successful. But to answer the question, Todd, yes, I think there's room for data inspired. I think there's room for all three. I think if you're not doing all three, you're probably missing opportunities.
I love that. So here's just so you can see them all three together, advantages and disadvantages. And we're gonna go into now, how do you determine what's appropriate? We've talked about some of that so far. What are the situations and what are the goals that make a certain archetype more appropriate? But before we do, let's talk more about bias. Let's talk about the elephant in the room here. All three are biased. So I want to share this. This is a mind-blowing fact here. So I hope you're ready for this. Humans can be irrational. I know you probably never. Yeah, they can, Rina. It's crazy. If you've been on social media, you know this to be true. Regardless of how we're making decisions, we need to guard against bias. I'll use a quick definition here I got from Mind Tools. I like it a lot, about cognitive bias or psychological bias. It's the tendency to make decisions or take action in an unknowingly irrational way. And I love that because we don't intend to be irrational most of the time. We're taking action, we're making a decision, and it's not rational. So these are some types of bias. I'll talk about each one. I'll tell you what they are and give you an example of it. And Rina, feel free to interrupt me if you have your own feedback on these.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, so I did want to say, so Jake Shapiro says that data itself has no inherent bias. And I would agree. It's we as humans assign meaning to that. We drive insights and those insights can have some bias. And I agree to the points that he's making. It's about asking questions and avoiding blind spots and collecting data appropriately. I see another question. So Todd, I want you to go through the biases and then we'll take some more questions from the audience.
Great. I love that clarification. That's perfect. So confirmation bias, you've probably heard of this before. So when you trust the data that supports your belief, but reject the data that doesn't. The example I came up with, I've seen here in my career is in reviewing win-loss data in sales, when you're trying to say, why did we win or why did we lose that deal with a potential customer? And when you're going through that and the result that you come up with is everyone who didn't choose our product just wasn't our target customer. At some point, that's just not true. And so that's a great example of confirmation bias. They're wrong. They're not our customer. This is our customer. Recency bias. This is where you place greater value on the most recent data together. Every product manager knows this. Every product manager has, because we all have had a salesperson come to us. I just got off the phone with the customer. This integration is going to close the deal. We need this integration. And now we're going to change the release plan. We're going to change the sprint plan based on this one customer call. That's really recency bias because you're not considering the rest of the market. Is that really the right decision to make? Authority bias. This is why I have the picture here. It's your hippo. If you've never heard of the
That's
hippo.
not me though, right?
No, never. You're never the hippo. So it's the highest paid person's opinion. And Belief that something must be right because the highest paid person said so. And we can fall victim to this because one, it makes it easier and faster. It's a lot easier for me to go, well, Rina said it, so I'm just going to do it. That's easier than me challenging Rina with the question. And this is when we prioritize our roadmap. We begin to do that just based on whatever the super executive VP of everything says. Anchoring bias. This is jumping to conclusions based on early returning data. I've seen this over and over again in my career. I've had the temptation to do this. I have one empathy interview and I'm ready to move. Or we're doing surveys and we sent surveys to 100 people, but we have 5 surveys back and I'm ready to take that data and move. It's so hard, but you have to wait, right? So this jumping to conclusions. The last one, survivorship bias. This is when you only consider the successful and more optimistic data. Rina, I'm sure you've seen this in forecasting and business cases are the first examples I thought of. It's really easy to be like, well, you know, Ford was successful when he made the car, right? So I'm doing, yeah, Ford was successful.
Fair enough.
but we all do that. I love that because I mean, we all do it. It's really easy just to look at the positive data.
I have to say I'm guilty of multiple of these. And so it's about being aware of it because you want to have the best outcome and you want an efficient way to do it. Now, unfortunately, these biases come because our brain is wired for shortcuts, right? It's part of our evolution. We see patterns, we want to make sense of patterns, and it's much faster for our brain to not work as hard and just create the patterns in what we're seeing. So it is part of our evolution and it's going to be with us always. So there's no way to completely get rid of it. And I don't want anybody to walk away from this webinar thinking, got it, I know how to counteract all of these biases. I'm going to be the most, it's not going to work. It's more about understanding and using that to help you get to a better outcome.
I like that as a new way of introducing ourselves in meetings too. Hi, I'm Todd. You're right. Like I pictured when you were saying that, by the way, I pictured someone in a jungle taking the time to consider whether or not it's logical that there's a threat in the bushes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, do we want to get to our question or should I go through mitigating bias first?
Go through mitigating bias.
Okay, cool. So just really quickly, how do we mitigate these? We're aware of them, which is good. We got to be aware of them. How do we mitigate them? Confirmation bias, seek out opposing data points, right? Actually look for things that are counter to what you agree with. Be open to them. Recency bias, you should have retained older feedback. You got to look at everything historically together, target them together. This is my favorite one, authority bias. I love this. We even talk about this in DPM, digital product management course. Reframe the HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion, as one hypothesis. Reframe it as a hypothesis and be willing to then outline questions to test it and go gather data. Best case scenario, you come back and you're like, guess what? You're right. And now I have all this data to support you. Or worst case scenario, you come back and you're like, well, I have data to make the right decision. Either way, it's a win. Anchoring bias, slow down. I have to remind myself this all the time. We say at a 280 group, we'll say delay until the last responsible moment. So really make sure you have the right data, make sure you've concluded all of your surveys, and then survivorship bias, consider the pessimistic data points. They may be right, especially if they occupy 20 to 50% of the data, there's probably a trend there.
So Todd, Callum asks, how can groupthink affect bias? Which one? That's a good question, right?
I love that question. So groupthink, yeah, groupthink is powerful. And I see this a lot of times when you're, you have like a group and you're trying to do a group interview to get feedback on something, like a focus groups. You'll have a powerful voice in the room and then other people will follow that powerful voice almost in a kind of authority bias way. This person's authoritative, so we're going to follow them. And there's another kind of bias I didn't list here where you want to be part of the group. I forget the name of it, but you want to be seen as a inclusive. So I'll tell you how to get around that. The way to get around it is to, when you're doing kind of a group discussion and you need to get group feedback, start off with having people answer things on paper on their own and then read answers as opposed to just saying them out loud. Rina, do you have thoughts too on that?
Yeah, I do. So these are just some biases. Economics and psychology is rife with others. you're not going to get to know all of them. We're just showing some. I agree. There is a bias for us as social creatures to want to be part of a group. And I think it's actually even more important to know when you're leading a group discussion and you're even doing what Todd is saying, get individual perspectives one-on-one. When that group starts to talk, there's other psychological things that happen. There are people who will say something to you one-on-one, and then in a group contradict exactly what they are saying. So this is by no means a psychology lesson, and I agree. There's even more things that you should be considering, but these are some helpful ways to consider data and different data points and try to, I think, do a lot of these kinds of exercises so that you can get a little bit more clear on the final answer.
I love that. So as product managers, product leaders, product owners, we have lots of decisions we need to make. We're always trying to strike this balance between, we have outcomes that we need to achieve. We need to drive those outcomes. We have buy-in we need to get. We need lots of people to be on the same page. We have that group of people that we need to bring together. And we have constraints. There's a lack of time. There's a lack of access to data. We're lacking resources, and we're balancing these three things together. Our goal is to bring them together and efficiently make optimal decisions that's supported by data and gain buy-in. So what does this best? Data-driven, data-informed, data-inspired? Let's talk about the context and how we make that decision. So these are some, we start by just considering our desired outcomes. We've talked about this a lot. Know where you're headed, know what your outcome is first, the outcome you're trying to achieve. I think this is a big challenge to being data-led, is this pull to focusing on outputs. It's a common pull, it's constant to ship something on time, on budget, and losing the focus on data, because ultimately the only metric you're looking at is, did I deliver it on time? Which turns you in a short order cook, right? You're reaching in the backlog, you're grabbing something, you pull it out, and you deliver it. So first off, we want to make sure you shift that paradigm to focus on the outcomes. And I have two different types of outcomes here. Business outcomes, which are measurable company goals, like monthly recurring revenue. And these are given to us as product managers. We don't control business outcomes. We're told this is what the business wants to achieve. We get this from management, from leadership. And then we have more control over the product outcomes, which are actual changes in human behavior that are a result from changes to our products. And so this is what our focus needs to be on. What changes are we make? What outcome do we want to make amongst our user base? And then how are we going to approach that? And these revolve around measuring usage of the product. And we use these to determine our roadmap and to drive the business outcomes. All this to say, the start of this is, what is my desired outcome?
So Todd, we have a question here from Maggie. I think that relates to this conversation. And she writes, and I'm going to try to paraphrase because I'm not clear. Maggie, feel free to post another question if I got it wrong. But there are organizational assumptions made about how to actually measure a KPI. And sometimes if the measurement is bad, then the outcome of trying to better that KPI does not actually achieve a business outcome. So have you had any experience or any advice here?
I love this. It's funny, is in 2 slides, we're going to talk about choosing the right KPI. But I love this because this happens all the time. And if I'm following correctly, usually I would just ask for clarification. So feel free to put in the chat if I misunderstand. But if I follow correctly, it's kind of like when it's where you end up with a vanity metric. We think that we're going to increase. They want to increase. Let's say we want to decrease churn. The business wants to decrease churn. I believe we'll do this. And I measure, I'm like, I believe we'll do this by video platform, increasing video views. And so I'm going to increase video views. And there appears to be no connection. The first one I would say, the couple pieces of advice I can give offers this. One, there are many times in my career I've not been right with the metrics. It happens over and over again. I have an idea. So one, I say start by choosing what you think, and 3 to 5 is a good number of KPIs. Think about which ones I think will impact this, and then be willing to iterate. Be transparent with your leadership and tell them that, hey, here's what we're going to do. We think doing this will track whether or not we decrease churn. And over a month, you come back to them and iterate. What do you think, Rina?
So Todd, a couple of things. First of all, I think you hit it on the nail. Maggie says vanity metrics drive me nuts. They drive me nuts too, but sometimes you don't realize that they're vanity metrics until you start measuring them. One other interpretation I had, Maggie, of your question was, how do you consider, for example, an activated user? Right. So you might have a different definition as to what that user's behaviors and actions should look like to consider them activated. And let's say they log in, once a week. Maybe that's not really an activated user, but you should probably see that show up if your business outcomes are not being driven. And that's when you take to the leadership or the decision-making panel, forum, whatever you use to make the decision on that metric, and say, we have to rethink this, because it's not creating the outcomes that we're looking for.
And to give you an example of that, Rina, because big tech companies do this. They iterate all the time on this. Mm-hmm. At one point, Facebook wanted you to have, I believe it was, they knew you were active if you had 10 friends in the first week, I believe it was.
Something like that, yeah.
Something like that. And I think that metric has since changed. I don't know what it has changed to, but they're changing that as they learn about their product, and as some of their business outcomes, their business outcomes change. Yeah.
Good example.
Let's get into constraints here. We're going to balance these constraints. And I've created this. I've recently learned these are called Charlie balls. So I put these Charlie balls out here. I don't know why they're called that. These little dots.
Well, I learned something new at this webinar.
Called Charlie balls. So these little dots, they kind of show you how to, what you might consider for each of these types of constraints. So the first one's lack of data. This happens to us all the time. Lack of data may be appropriate for a data-inspired situation. Rina already went over this in depth, so I won't repeat, but when it's appropriate to find lots of different ideas, generate innovation. Data-driven, you may need some access to data, but limited, because you only need 1 or 2 KPIs. For example, an A/B test. We just need to know left or right, A or B, and we'll move on. In the data-informed scenario, you're going to need lots of data. You will need a mix of qualitative and quantitative data, or you may need to find trends. I'll say again, it's not an excuse not to be data informed. If I have to make an important product decision that requires me to have lots of data, and I don't have that data, that means I have to go ask for it or find some way to acquire it. And I have to be able to go say, okay, I need to have, Rina, I want to answer this question. I need to interview 10 customers. Can you help me find some customers to interview? It's not appropriate to say, Rina, I don't have 10 customers, so, oh well, I'm going to be data inspired. Amount of time. How much time do we have on our plate? Data inspired, you can move a little quicker. Data driven early on, it takes a little time to devise a model, develop a model, but then it scales well. Data informed takes more time. Again, not an excuse, but this is why it brings home how important it is to communicate when your deadline is going to be, how much time it will take. Ask for clear objectives and outcomes from your leadership, and then be able to report back to them. Okay, I'm going to need to do X, Y, Z, and I should be able to give you an answer at this point in time. So be transparent about it. Data frequency, how often, or decision frequency, sorry. How often do we need to make this decision? Is it a lot? Is it very often? Is it repetitive? That's really good for something like Google and Facebook ads. If you're a marketing manager and you're just choosing which ads is the best, right? You move quickly on that. You can use a nice data-driven way. A/B testing. I use the example data-driven dashboard. Repetitive decision-making, data-driven all the way. The last one is experience level here. I will say this: in data inspired, if you want to be data inspired, you want to innovate, you need experience, you need knowledge, you need people, deep subject matter expertise to do that. It's too challenging not to. So that's a requirement. And on the flip side of that, I say this all the time: if you have some entry-level junior people reporting to you, help enable them with some data-driven methods to make decisions. So then you don't have to make all, if you're a product leader and you don't want to make all the decisions, or you're a product manager, give some points to help your engineering team, your UX team to make decisions quicker by creating a model for them.
So everyone, we're getting close to our Q&A portion. So I just want to remind everyone to please put in I see some questions in the chat where we'll get to it. And if you're going to ask any questions, you can also use the Q&A box to ask them anonymously. But I just want to, again, remind the audience.
Thanks. So Now we're choosing the right KPIs. Hey, we're coming back to the question about KPIs.
Mhm.
We've identified our outcomes. We know what we're going to do. We know we need to be data informed. And now we need to measure that we're on track. And the key is choosing the right 3 to 5 KPIs. So I wanted to give you 6 of them here that are helpful. We're often asked about usage, and as product managers, we're focused on usage, but usage isn't a metric. You don't measure usage. You can measure user engagement in a lot of different ways. And so you need to consider which of these will tell me I'm on the right track to achieving my outcome. So the first one we have is depth. There's a question associated with each of these. So I'll give you some questions as examples that are associated with each of these. How much of our product do they use? Do our users use? How are they using 20% of our features? What percentage of our features are they using? And which ones do they prefer? So again, if we need to be data informed and we need to make a decision on whether or not there's a feature that should be retired, this depth KPI is going to help us to determine that. Or which feature should we be optimizing? Well, we need to know a couple of things there. We need to know which one is used heavily. We need to know which ones seem to attract users. And we're going to use a lot of this different data to determine, okay, which one should we focus our time now on optimizing? Breadth, how many active users do we have? For B2B, this could be how many users per customer do we have? And this is helpful in making those decisions about, again, when we look at how, what do we need to do to get more daily active users, monthly active users? Are we on the right track with our DAU MAU ratio? Which I'm going to be a geek again. In our DPM class, go to that in depth because I'm really nerdy about DAU MAU. Frequency, how often do users log in?
Wait, Todd, that's daily active users, monthly active users.
Thank you. I'm using inside
DAU MAU.
daily active users, monthly active users, apologize. And then how often, frequency, how often are they logging in? All day, once a week, once a month. Paths, this is really important. I love paths and funnels. This will help you if one of the desired outcomes there is to make sure that people are getting the job done that they're trying to accomplish, reaching their own objectives, your users reaching their objectives. We need to understand what their journey is, how hard it is to complete each task, where they're getting stuck. User sentiment, what is our user's impression of our product? Everything that you consider should also be considered with, does my user love my product? I like the 3 A's, acquire, adopt, adore. I don't just want my users to acquire the product and adopt the product. I want them to adore the product. So when I'm being data informed, I'm making sure nothing impacts negatively my user sentiment. And then finally was feedback. How do we rate in the moment? We want to get back our user satisfaction in the moment and learn about what's working for them, what's not working for them.
So Todd, I have here a question on usage from one of our listeners, and they write that they manage an internal product that creates or gets a lot of usage, but this product manager doesn't think that their users are using the product as intended. However, leadership or their management thinks the product is successful, so they can't seem to be making any changes. So what would you recommend?
I've had this problem multiple times in my career. It's hard. So I'll say this first off about managing an internal product. I manage an internal product the same way I do an external product. I have users, they just happen to be internal, right? I need them to acquire the product and adopt it and adore it, just like I do a market to. And so again, I go back to, that's a hippo's opinion, right? They're looking at the wrong KPI and they're using that KPI to suggest that it's working. So what I need is data. And the data I need to do some observation. I need to see how they're using it. I need to walk through that. The data I need is what's the intended result and are we achieving it? A lot of times I found out in one case, we went on some of those observations that the product was being used, but it was used improperly in that it was only used at the very end of the activity to enter data, as opposed to being used throughout the activity to make things more efficient. So those are some things I would tackle to make sure we're hitting the nail on the KPI.
I'd also encourage this person to go to their leadership and ask them to define not just what product success means this year, but the next 3 years. So try to get them to think also of the long-term view, because something about what's happening today probably won't get them to where they want to go 3 years from now. So you want to make them realize that, and then in fixing this problem, you're going to make them look good. So it should be in their interest to listen to you.
One thing, I know we're at the 10-minute mark. I'd love to get to some questions.
Yeah, there are a few here. So please feel free to, again, while we're going through questions, to put them in the Q&A box. If we don't get to all of them, we'll do our best today. So there was one earlier one from Hamad where he writes, I think he writes, I have the word data-driven in my CV. What word would you best describe how you value data in making product decisions? So I think it's more of like a career advice question. How do you show you're data-driven or data-informed in your career?
Yeah, I love this. I love this. So one thing I'll say is, when you walk out of this meeting, I take some time to consider, like, okay, where can I use data where maybe we aren't using data, or how can I use data to make decisions where we're not today? And this is what product leaders do. Product leaders teach stakeholders. You're a constant teacher. And so if you want to show that you're someone who leads using data, no matter how small your influence may be, no matter what your situation is, sit down and think, okay, what data do we need to make the decision within the realm I'm making it? Let me find that data and then communicate it out. The part that we miss the most is sometimes we get good data, we make a decision, and then we stop there. Well, the next part is communicate what you did and how you did it. Rina, you're gonna see that in my email today. But communicate, look, this is the process I took. I gathered this data. This is a decision point I had to make. I use the data to make this decision. And then people begin to see, like, oh, this is a thoughtful product leader who knows what they're doing. So I hope that helps you.
Yeah, Todd, joke is on you, because now I'm definitely expecting an email from you. So my other, and just in case this was how do I position myself with being data-driven, I really encourage you to not just use data-driven in your resume or your personal statement. It's not about being data-driven. It's about showing the value that comes from being data-driven. So tell the stories around the business outcomes and objectives you were able to achieve. Or even if you're not able to achieve those outcomes, what were the learnings that you got as a result of being data-driven? And that's what will help you stand out.
I love that. I was going to add to that. I love that you said it too, because the other thing I would add, remember this, not doing something is a great decision as well, if you can support that with data. So even telling that story, oh, we were going to do this and I decided not to, or I made a decision based on data and we failed and now I know this is why. That's all being data-driven, data-informed.
So we have a few questions here around, I guess, collecting types of data. So Libby asks, what are the top 3 sources of data you can use to validate product requirements and roadmap decisions? Win-loss calls, customer engagement calls, industry analysis research. Do you have some advice here? I think the answer really is it depends, right? It's one of those.
The answer is truly it depends, right? Yeah. It really depends on the phase of your product. It depends on the desired product, the desired business outcomes, because you really should be gathering the appropriate data for whatever that decision is. But I will say this, the one left out there, I have yet to work in a situation where interviewing users was not a part of the puzzle. So regardless of what the puzzle is, at some point going to who your end user is and actually talking with them about how they use it or seeing how they use the product in action is going to bring a lot more information than looking at a dashboard.
Yeah, I'll also add, as a stakeholder that then reviews your proposal, usually I'm in that position, I get really motivated when I hear stories. So it's, okay, there's going to be prioritization methods where you're going to want to include, frequency of customer support calls that, are associated with this feature being bad, whatever that tactical part is, but also drawing and bringing the story of what happened to that user as a result of them not being able to use your product, and the pain that caused is something I think very effective for management. The follow-up here is, what is a good way to scale data gathering? Phone calls and manual research is resource heavy. I have a short answer for that one. Sometimes the answer is you may not be able to, but There are ways to create code where you're able to scrape websites, automate that process. Then it's really about cleaning and filtering that data. So clean data it's a challenge. I'll agree that it is a challenge. Todd, do you have any other experience with how to scale data gathering?
Yeah, my answer started with yours as well. And I'll also add this though. I think a lot of times we think we need more data than we do need. The example I'll give is, since I was talking about user interviews just a minute ago, I'll give that example. A lot of times we think we need 15, 20 user interviews, and that's very unusual to need so many interviews. A lot of times you can do is 5 to 7. Once you see enough of those themes coming through, that's enough to indicate you're going the right direction and you can stop. So I think part of the reason we're worried about scale is because we need so many. We just don't.
That's a good answer, Todd. Can you advance the slide? And so that we can also launch the poll. So for everybody that joined us today, I think, thank you so much for coming and for asking your great questions. Of course, if you're interested in learning more, we have a digital product management course that's available, like I said, on a self-study, go at your own pace, or even a live with an instructor. There is one class that is filling up right now that's starting on March 21st. There will be a coupon code for $500 off that you could take advantage as a thank you for attending this webinar. We're going to be launching a poll. We want to hear your feedback on whether or not you thought this webinar was helpful. I love this, highly helpful, or not at all helpful. Please choose those two so that we can get really good feedback on this. And I do want to also remind you, while this poll is going, if you could advance the slide while the poll keeps going, that we have a few upcoming webinars. Now, I hope in my culture, we celebrate International Women's Day, and we are doing this at 280 Group as well. We have a great Ask Me Anything, Thriving as a Woman in Product Management on March 17th. You'll hear from a few female leaders in the product management space. And it's an Ask Me Anything, so come with your questions. Men are also invited. It's really a webinar to empower women leaders. And on March 21st, we will be going through modern budgeting for 2 days product management world. So please sign up today and join us for that webinar. There should be a link to take a look at all of our upcoming events. And last but not least, if you like what you hear today and you want to learn more about any of our services, or you're interested as a leader in increasing the effectiveness of your team, learning how to really apply some of these skills and data with your team, feel free to please contact us today. We will be pasting, again, a link to contact our sales team. Thank you all so much for joining us. Todd, great presentation. I learned about Charlie balls, so I hope everybody else here got something they could take away from our webinar today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.